Greetings, dear listeners. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the tauntaun rolling their eyes at the uncivilized humans who can't even read smells.
I love it. And I am Pace, and I am the original Emperor image from the theatrical version, which was replaced by the current actor who plays the Emperor, Ian McDermott, I believe is his name.
Yeah, I like the
Nice.
first one better.
So I'm the lost piece of footage, I
The
guess.
Lost
With that one.
Emperor.
The Lost Emperor, yes.
And I'm Beth, and to paraphrase Princess Leia addressing Han, I do have my moments. Not many, but I do have them. So I'm hoping I have some of those moments here with you today.
I think we're off to a good start.
Yep.
Mhm. I will say, I rewatched this just recently, and the new footage, I was like, this is wrong. Something's wrong. It doesn't feel...
Yeah. Right.
Yep. We watched the theatrical release for this, and then I was gonna rewatch the non-theatrical release with like commentary, and then ended up taking 2 naps today, so did not get to that.
Good call.
But Pace sent me a thing that had like, these are all of the differences, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, which you may be surprised by. There are not that many differences for this film in particular. The other two, there are more, but we'll get into that. And also, just a reminder, we have our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch. For only $5, you can get exclusive access to like so much bonus content. Just this month, we're covering Star Wars: The Clone Wars, where we have a movie commentary about Predator 2. And we also are, for our $10 tier, we are covering the movie The Ewoks Battle for Endor, the second of those 2 movies, Ewok movies.
Oh, I remember watching those. And
Yep.
now I don't need to ever watch them again.
Yep. And always feel free to check our show notes for content warnings for the episode. We'll put those in there.
Today, we have a very special guest who I'm super excited about. Beth Wartick is a pastor, an amateur baking enthusiast, and a parent of a kid named Luke. She lives in Iowa with her family and 2 cats. That seems a little bit rude to your second child.
Yeah, I had a moment where I was like, oh, I'm leaving her out, but she doesn't have a Star Wars name. So, like, yeah, I do have 2 children.
But
They're
she
both
does have
important.
like a church name, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got literally the nerds and the church.
It's true. And when people ask where her name is from, I'm like, oh, it's from Romans chapter 16, verse 7. And they're like, oh, wow, you must be really into the Bible.
And then you're like, I mean, I am a pastor, so.
Yep.
Love it.
Welcome, Beth.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
It's good to have you. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. We have our running joke in here that neither of us can do transitions for the podcast because we're both non-binary. So we're 2 non-binary, 2 NB, 2 transition.
I heard there's t-shirts for that.
Yes, in our merch store.
Okay, that's what I heard.
I love it.
That's fantastic.
I don't need the t-shirt, but like there are people who do, and I love that.
There's also 2 NB to not transition.
Yep.
For people who are not me, but
yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, also that's a great segue into our announcements of reminding you to check out our merch store. By the time this comes out, I'm pretty sure I will have both of our season 6 designs up and ready. One will be a t-shirt of Leia hugging R2D2, and it will have the text, "All droids go to heaven." And then
That was my idea. And BB-8's on it too.
Yeah, and
Oh my
BB-8's
gosh.
on it too. And then the other shirt is a picture of a xenomorph, which are the aliens from the Alien franchise,
Who
wearing
I've now seen.
wearing wearing Jedi robes and wielding a lightsaber to celebrate
Mm,
the fact that we're doing Star Wars and Aliens this season.
that
Sweet.
works. Yeah, I like it. I like it. I'm excited. And all of our Patreon supporters get a discount code, so you can get 10%
If
off.
we can make sure it's working. It wasn't working
I double
for Emily
checked it
earlier.
this time.
Oh, it does now?
Yeah,
Oh, thank
I double
goodness.
checked because I'm a Patreon supporter of us from before I was on the podcast.
I know I'm supporting Emily's other podcast. It's kind of like I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Or what Emily called in her last Star Wars episode, nepotism, but the good kind. Nepotism, but the good kind, apparently.
Uh-huh.
I was
Yeah,
just
or
like,
like
just watching Beth's face, like,
no, I was like, or is it the mutual consolation of the saints? I don't know.
Yes,
Maybe.
all of
Like
those things.
both and. False binary. Both and. Yep. Indeed. Indeed.
um, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We also need a false binary T-shirt. We say it so much.
It's
mm,
true.
Maybe that'll
I.
be a season 7 merch
Mm.
or a Pride Month. We always try to have a new merch for Pride Month, so maybe
I wrote Pride Month because it's a
yeah,
very good Nerds at Church and Horror Nerds at Church.
for sure, for sure. We do
Because.
have Pride merch up there year round, but
Mm-hmm.
we always
True.
try to put up a new design for Pride Month.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last announcement I have is our newsletter is back. You can check it out on horrornerdsatchurch.substack.com. You can subscribe there and read it. And it, by the time this episode comes out, hopefully the February newsletter has been released. And
Ooh. So I should
beyond
probably
that,
like write my thing for that.
yeah, probably. I haven't written mine yet either, so it's all good. Um, yeah, but this month's article from Emily and I is talking about our first times watching Star Wars and like kind of what drew us to the series, I think. So you can read all about those thoughts there.
Yeah. I don't remember that, but yeah.
And
Speaking of watching and reading, what's everyone Betty? Blah. I almost had a good one and then I had to trip over my words. What's What's everybody been watching or reading? That was way too hard. Anybody? Have you been watching or reading anything?
I have just begun dipping my toes into the extended Marvel universe in
Ooh.
Disney.
Yes.
So I got through all of WandaVision, which
Mm.
was like so good, and then
I
I
haven't
started
actually
in
seen that one.
on Falcon and Winter Soldier. WandaVision was super fun because it's just an extended question about PTSD. Like it's
Ah.
Mhm.
um
All right.
but with like fun costumes and like quirky sitcom moments.
Yeah,
So,
Mm-hmm.
and a really slow burn too, which makes it fun and engaging.
mhm.
Yeah.
I love
I
it.
just finished watching Hawkeye, which I watched after watching Echo, which is the reverse order from what you're supposed to. And I didn't know that Hawkeye was Christmassy. Otherwise, I would have watched it way sooner. Um, but it was fantastic. I really enjoyed both of those. I particularly enjoyed what Disney did with Echo, and the actual like work they did with the Choctaw Nation, to be contextual and respectful and not just like yoink, we're gonna take your culture and just do whatever we want with it. But also, I really liked Hawkeye. I've always had a special place in my heart for Hawkeye.
Did you know that Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, is supposed to be from Iowa and that's why his name is Hawkeye?
I did not know
Oh,
that.
wow.
As, a not quite lifelong Iowan, but born and living here again now. Just gotta claim him along
Hmm.
with Captain Kirk. So we don't have a lot going for us, but we got a
Especially
couple.
right now. But yeah,
Yeah. Um, but we got Hawkeye and Captain Kirk. So
nice, nice. I have been reading. By now, the episode will have come out. So I have been reading How I Killed Pluto and Why It Had It Coming for Nerds at Church for an episode we're recording tomorrow.
I love that
Um,
book, by the way. So good.
it's really good and it's like super easy, quick read. I mean, I don't know that I'll finish it by tomorrow, but I'm on chapter 5. So I just started it like yesterday. But yeah, it's fantastic because we have currently, it will be closed by now by the time this airs, but Nerds at Church has a Pluto poll um, up to encourage people to vote for their opinions on Pluto. And it's been
Okay.
interesting to see the development.
Once in elementary school, in a play about the solar system, I played Pluto.
Ooh.
So
Aww.
then Pluto stopped being a planet shortly after that.
Womp womp. I
Oh
mean,
well.
depends on your definition, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's another conversation. We're
Yeah.
hoping for an angry letter from Pace for our episode.
I probably won't. We'll see though. I need to listen to the episode to see how angry I get.
I mean, we need to
Angry.
record it first. So,
Yes.
for the record, Pace's angry emails tend to have something to do with like something that they disagree with us on, but are not actually angry. They're just emails that we then talk about on air.
And
We
also
love
Right.
them.
and also a reminder, speaking of angry emails, that if you have yet to
Oh
write
yeah.
in your fact checked email for Emily's facts from our last Star Wars episode, feel free to do so. Horror Nerds at Church. Email them, and they will read it on air. Or at
You're
least respond on air. We might not be able to read all of them.
yeah, you're right. I yeah. The last episode that we recorded on Star Wars, Pace was not there for the first half because of a like complicated thing.
Mhm.
And so I had to do the background by myself. And Pace usually does all the background all the time. And I
Mm.
occasionally like throw in some randomness. Um, so I got some stuff wrong.
Well,
But
it happens.
so far we have not gotten any so far we have not gotten any problem or any
and
angry emails.
yeah, and the one day our episode has been out. So
I mean, fair.
um
Fair.
what have I been watching though? I don't I'm watching Doctor Who.
Oh yeah.
Doing I'm doing my Doctor Who in a year what would I call it? Like watch order, viewing order or something that I started and that Emily now joined in on.
It's true. I did. I joined 27 days late, but will still likely end before the year is out because there's only 300 something.
Yeah, like 312 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever the new season is finished coming out. Serials and the entire 60-year history of Doctor Who.
Yeah. So if you are interested, Pace has a watch order for everything. Pace gave me a watch order for Star Wars when we were like trying to figure out Clone Wars and Ahsoka and stuff. Pace has a
Mhm.
watch order for Doctor Who, either alternating episode slash serials or alternating
Oh,
seasons. So
Mm-hmm.
you get classic and reboot.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am a
Anyway,
nerd. That's where we got our
yeah.
name from.
Well,
Yay.
Or nerds at church.
It's true. It's true. We're all about the nerdery. Um. Anyway, I don't have a transition. I can't, speaking of nerdery, talk about church horror. But uh, on this podcast, we usually ask our guests to share with us, if they are willing, a real life church horror story. So this can be a supernatural kind of story, or it can be a real shitty theology or shittiness at church story, or both, or as we say in Genesis, between or beyond.
mm.
So, Beth, do you have a real life church horror story for us?
Well, yeah. I was thinking about this. I couldn't really think of something like in a supernatural horror story kind of way. Like I certainly have some supernatural things, but what I what I found myself thinking of was actually a time when I was in college.
Mm.
So I went to a college that was affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is a denomination that does not ordain women, just so that everybody knows. And halfway through my senior year, I had applied to Luther Seminary and gotten a full ride scholarship. And so the marketing department was like, this is great. We got to brag about this. One of our students got a full ride scholarship to grad school. So they wrote up this whole article about like me as a student and the things I was involved in and like, you know, what I was going to do and whatever. And I think it had been published for like a day before enough complaints had come into the president's office that they yanked it. And then, which I realized when like, I don't know, someone I had sent the link to was like, this isn't here. Um, and then heavily revised it and put it back. So if you read it, it sort of made it sound like I was going to like do like, you know, children's ministry, which is a good and beautiful ministry, but like not the ministry that I was going to do. Um, yeah. And I later learned apparently that was something that like people were talking about within the ELCA. I had a colleague like years later, I was retelling this story and he was like, that was you? You were like, I don't know, it got onto like Reddit or something, like, or whatever the social media was 12 years ago.
That's fascinating. Right now, Reddit and the ELCA is like apparently a little bit on fire too. But
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
As my professor Brooke Schramm says, professor of Hebrew Bible, great guy, but he always says, never speak ill of the Missouri Synod. They gave us their best people.
I mean, like, where is the lie there?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
the
that's super
people,
true.
the people who were doing real deep theological, biblical scholarship with historical context, historical critical context, all came over to us, and
Yep.
you,
Seminex, all of that.
and
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
right, like all of Seminex, and then like women, and
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
that's a good
that's
point.
funny.
Yeah.
I don't know your professor, but I may requote your professor.
He would be delighted. So please do. I don't have a transition for this. I'm not going to try to make one, but we are talking about a movie, Star Wars, Episode 5, The
We're
Empire
like
Strikes
extra
Back.
not transitioning right now, just so you
Right.
know. This is like extra even for us.
But this was directed. I'll just throw in our transition music. It makes it less awkward.
Oh, we have
I do that
transition
whenever we
music?
have really bad ones.
I didn't know we had transition music. I thought we just had it for the deep dive.
No, we've had transition music even before the deep dive one.
You can blame me if you want. Like I'm super cis, right? So like
You're
it's
really
just
not
perhaps
transitioning.
debilitating to the transitioning capacity.
I love
To be
it.
fair, one time Bishop Brenda Boss was a guest, and then she like recorded a bunch of like transitions for us, so we could always use hers if we needed to.
Yes.
Oh
Like
my
just
gosh, I love it.
as a joke, and I still have yet to release on Patreon. I keep meaning to, but other stuff gets in the way. But I need to.
I think we just need to pop it in. She did the Nerds at Church Muppets music, so
I love it.
on kazoo.
Wow.
She's great.
The hidden depths of the giftedness of the church. Man.
Right.
I
Right.
know. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if only people knew. Well, now they will. At least our
Yep.
listeners will.
Yeah, our listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Star Wars, eh?
yeah, Star Wars, eh? Uh, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, directed Irvin Kershner, came out in 1980. So that's 44 years ago. Wow. To contextualize it, came out the same year as 925. Great movie, Dolly Parton, love her. Airplane, The Blues Brothers, Caddyshack, Xanadu, which I weirdly love this movie, which is such a gay thing to say, but I'll own it. And then in the horror world, we have The Fog, The Ninth Configuration, which we talked about in our Exorcist um, episode with TJ Tranchel. The Changeling, which we talked about in season 5, our ghost season. The Shining, which we covered in season 4. Friday the 13th, which we covered in season 2.
And we did a movie commentary.
Yeah. Emily, so you can
on the
hear.
last Friday the 13th.
Yeah, so Patreon supporters, so anybody can listen to our Friday the 13th episode from season 2. That's still up on our main feed, but that was before Emily became co-host. So if you want to listen to Emily's thoughts on it or watch along for a movie commentary, both are up on Patreon, so you can listen. And then we also, Terror Train came out. This was a big year in slasher
Yeah.
movies. So Terror Train came out, which we covered on season 4. Motel Hell and Christmas Evil all came out as well.
Guess what? This is a miracle. I am familiar with more of the horror movies than I've watched of the non-horror movies that Pace just listed.
That is a
Pace
miracle.
does the entire contextualization for me because I'm like, I don't know when things came out. I don't know what else is
Time
happening in
doesn't
that time period.
exist. It's an illusion.
But I like have seen 9 to 5, and I have like heard of Blues Brothers and Caddyshack and Xanadu. But I've seen The Changeling and The Shining and Friday the 13th and Terror Train. It's a miracle. This
Yeah,
bad one is definitely not a youngling anymore.
yep. Maybe in a season or 2 you'll be ready to pass your trials and become a true horror knight.
As long as they're not like Ahsoka's trials, because that was some bullshit.
Right.
We're gonna disbelieve you and think you're evil and all these things.
Listen to
Oh,
our
we
Ahsoka
didn't mess
episode.
up. Those were just your trials. We didn't do anything wrong.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's a mess. Um, so
Things to look forward to in March.
yeah, for Patreon. Yep. First time you have seen this movie, for me, I didn't get to share my Star Wars one, so you're hearing it here first because I missed that part of the Star Wars episode. So, because of my car problem. So, the first time I encountered Star Wars, I was in second grade. And of course, like I grew up in the pop culture zeitgeist of it, so I knew of Star Wars, but I never actually like watched the movies till I was in second grade. And my grandfather was dying, and so my parents were visiting him and up there with him in the hospital. And so I was staying with a parishioner. My mom was a pastor, so I was staying at a parishioner's house who introduced me to Star Wars. And so we just watched through the entire trilogy. And so that was my first time watching Empire Strikes Back. And I remember being so inspired by the movie that I wrote and illustrated a short story in which Han Solo dies at the end in trying to fight against the Emperor. And I showed it to that parishioner, and and keep in mind I'm in second grade. The parishioner
Yeah.
was so upset that Han Solo died, and said that that wasn't a good story. So then she made me go back and change it so Luke Skywalker resurrected Han at the end.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Which is both like a mark of good storytelling, right? That you moved her so significantly that she was like very, very upset. And also, like, poor second grade Pace.
Yeah. I upset a lot of parishioners, not intentionally, but one parishioner reported my mom to the bishop because apparently, speaking of church horror stories, because apparently my mom was a bad mother because she didn't take it seriously when I drew a picture of Neo from The Matrix. When the parishioner saw this and discovered this, that I was going to be a school shooter because I drew a picture of Neo from The Matrix. And my mom didn't take it seriously, so my mom was reported to the bishop by that parishioner. And the bishop was like, okay, what?
That's not actually how that works.
Yep.
Fascinating.
So, what about any of you? We're just going to keep this podcast super happy today. Let's not keep doing
No kidding.
it. Yeah.
So I was thinking about this. The timing of the Star Wars movies is that like they came out in theaters when my parents were in high school and college. And I just, as a child, I don't remember the first time I saw them, but I remember them being like just a piece of the available film literature, right? You know, there's like 3 dozen, VHS tapes on the wall. Most of them are Disney, right? But there's like this box set of the Star Wars
I
trilogy.
have
At
the
that time,
box
the
set
only
of the
Star Wars
Star Wars
trilogy.
trilogy on VHS too.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And so I was trying, like, racking my brain, like, when did I first? I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I've always known, like,
Mm-hmm.
that, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad. Like, that's just, like, was the background. Not the only thing we watched, but just this,
Mm-hmm.
that was there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like my first memories of Star Wars are around the prequel trilogy because we had the VHS and it was always there. And at some point, I know I watched them, like I was familiar with them, but I remember seeing the prequel trilogy in theaters and talking to my dad about when he first saw the original trilogy in theaters. But yeah, I also don't have a vivid memory.
Yeah,
But everybody gets to drink because Pace saw it before the age of 12.
true. It's true.
That's how we do it. That's our
Hmm.
drinking game. Almost the entirety of it is if Emily is watching it for the first time for this show, for this episode, or if Pace has seen it before the age of, I say 9, but 12. Either way. And most horror movies Pace has seen before the age of 12.
I mean, if it was before the age of 9, I'm not sure I saw this one before the age of 9 because I
Yeah.
turned 10 in October of second grade.
Yeah.
But before the age of 12, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we can get into a little bit behind the scenes for this, and I'll do my best to only say factual ones. I'm sorry, I just gonna
Mm-hmm.
um keep picking on Emily about that. With
I don't care.
love, my
That's fine.
Padawan. So Lucas bankrolled.
Sin boldly.
Yes,
Hello.
100% agree with that. Um, Lucas bankrolled production himself, so you can listen to our holiday special episode with Ben Monroe um, for some behind the scenes trivia there about a feud between Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola over Lucas's bankrolling this movie. And he didn't want to direct the film because he isn't a very good director, as we can tell from the prequels, but B, because he also wanted to focus his efforts on the special effects. So he brought in Irvin Kershner to direct it instead. Kershner did several passes at the script to humanize the characters more, which you can tell there's much more depth to the characters in this movie than the first one. And then still to this day, it's widely considered to be among the best, if not the best, Star Wars film. Uh, Yoda was puppeted and voiced by Frank Oz, who is perhaps most famous for the voice of Miss Piggy. A little bit of Nerds at Church crossover there with the Muppets.
Woot woot. Shout out to our interloping mini Muppet-sode
Yep,
from
yep.
December. Mm-hmm.
So Jim Henson and George Lucas will collaborate a few times after this movie. And so Henson did some uncredited work on the Yoda puppet to make it work better. Uh, Part of the reason why Han Solo's character was frozen in carbonite was because Harrison Ford was reluctant to return. He also suggested the line "I know" in the famous freezing scene. It was originally something like "I love you too," but he thought that would be not true to Han's character.
I
Um,
mean, true. He's kind of a jackass.
exactly.
I have a question about that. So I have heard, like, repeatedly, that part of the reason that I know is there is that, like, Carrie Fisher was on set, like, for recordings, like, high possibly, and kept saying his line instead of her line, and he finally just said, like, I know, out of frustration. Is this just a myth? Is there reality to this?
I don't know that I have not heard that one before, but that is definitely a possibility. Carrie Fisher has said, and definitely check out her autobiography, The Princess Diarist. It's really good. But
It's
she had
fantastic, and the audiobook is primo.
right
She
agreed.
narrates it herself.
But she's very open about her drug use during this time, and she even said we said in our the holiday special episode that she has no memory of filming that because she was so high the entire production. So it could very well be possible. Um, then the famous line that George Lucas will deny until his grave, but facts disagree with him on this. There is another that famous line by Yoda was going to be
Mm-hmm.
Luke's sister all along. That was the plan, though she was going to be a different Jedi and not Leia. So there's originally not going to be a relation between the character of Leia and Luke's sister. It's a completely different character. And she was hidden from Vader in a different part of the galaxy where she was trained in secret. Obi-Wan didn't even know about her, but Yoda did, which is why Yoda said there is another. You can find this out from early drafts of the Empire Strikes Back script. They were going to team up to defeat Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, but this would change during the pre-production when it was decided that introducing a new main character that late in the trilogy would have been too difficult. So they wanted to instead have a character that audiences already knew, being Leia, and knew from the first movie. So they had Leia become Luke's sister, which then makes some of the scenes in this movie to be a little bit creepy because this was before they intended Leia to be Luke's sister. Then some Doctor Who trivia, because you heard in our intro how much of a Doctor Who nerd Emily and I are. Bosk, who's the bounty hunter that looks like a lizard, his spacesuit is actually a recycled suit from the first Doctor Who serial, The 10th Planet, which is one. It was worn by one of the astronauts in that film. So they recycled that costume and used it. And the 10th Planet is the episode that the first Doctor regenerates into the second Doctor. And then the last thing I have is that this is the least altered of the original trilogy for the special edition. So infamously, like the Han shot first in the first movie and all that stuff. But all three of the movies were edited for the special edition releases in 1997. But this one has the least edits, and fans attest that to how good of a director Irving was.
Yeah. I don't have any extra because I didn't watch the director's commentary. I watched the director's commentary with the first one, and then Pace and I had talked about some of the stuff that Lucas had said, and he was saying other things in the commentary, and I was like, this feels like retconning, like totally meant for this to be that way. I do think that like Leia and Luke, the like love triangle is very obvious in the first two movies. The like setup for it, and then it's like, JK, she's your sister.
Which it does resolve the love triangle, right? Really abruptly.
Oh yeah. Real fast.
So
put that to stop. Yeah. But Carrie Fisher even talked about in the first movie that like she was the only person that was the age she was supposed to be, I think. For sure Luke was not. Mark Hamill was older than 19. But she talks about like that weird the like triangle of Luke, Han, Leia, and Mark Harrison, Carrie. That's it's a thing. Pretty sure she got together with Harrison at some point.
And Harrison was like 30 something at the time. I think he was like 31 or 32.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Anyway, wonderful background. Thank you very much for your service, Pace. We appreciate it a lot. Also, I noticed a couple times they did not say, "May the Force be with you," and I was like she just said, "Good luck" to Luke, and I was like, that feels.
This is the post Vatican II, I guess, of the trilogy. I don't know.
Well, I mean, in the first movie, right, you get a ton of Jedi on-screen action, right? And in the third movie, Luke has become a Jedi. You get a ton of Jedi on-screen action. You get a lot less here, right? And I don't know if Yoda ever says "May the Force be with you." I don't know if that's syntactically Yoda authentic.
True.
So maybe it's like the way people are like, oh, my pastor's here, I can't swear. You know, like we have to say, "May the Force be with you" to the Jedi people, but when we aren't, they're just not around. We just don't remember. Good luck.
Yeah, I like it.
That tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of the details in the movie, what is we've been doing one sentence summaries, because then we play a game at the end where I try and guess which episode, which like movie we're talking about based on one sentence summaries. So, what's your one sentence summary for this movie?
I didn't know about the game, so mine makes it very obvious because my one sentence summary is Han Solo starts out the movie very cold and ends the movie very cold.
But that is such a great one sentence summary.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. This just Pace has 3 options to choose from. you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Paces also kind of gives it away, so.
Space Strikes Back, because my one sentence summary for A New Hope was space.
Space strikes back. And mine was non-humanoids and droids get interrupted and harmed by humans. Because I was like, this is like the non-humans and the droids, and then everywhere the humans go, harm is sure to follow.
Emily's was the longest, so take a shot, I guess. Is that how
That's
we're
the other
doing
one.
it?
If mine is longer than Paces.
Well, yours is the
Okay.
longest out of everybody still.
Well, yeah. That's because
That,
humanoids is a really long word.
but that also
It really
started
is.
out as a joke because when Emily first started doing the one sentence summaries, like they were the most run-on compounded sentences
They were
ever.
compound sentences. I don't think they were run-on sentences, but they were definitely 2 lines.
You can do a lot with a semicolon.
Yeah. I don't think I even needed a semicolon for it. So maybe they were run-on. Yeah. Yeah. So, the movie.
Yeah, the
Space.
movie.
Striking back.
Speaking of,
Space.
speaking of,
I have to.
Han starting off cold and Luke starting off cold too. Like Hoth here is beautiful. They filmed in Iceland and Norway, I believe, for many of these scenes. But one of the reasons for setting it on Hoth was because George Lucas wanted the challenge of having to do his green screen work against a blue sky as opposed to a black outer space because it's easier to hide the special effects in outer space against a black background. So he was doing it purposefully to challenge him and ILM's special effect team. And I think the results by and large are pretty good. They've been cleaned up for the special editions to make it even better, but like even so in the original, they're still pretty good.
Yeah, there are some some of the special effects are always like, it is so very obvious to me that that is 2 inches big. And we're just
Yeah.
looking at it. But other ones, I'm like, okay, yeah, so we're improving. You see the gradual like improvement because the first Star Wars was like really the beginning of special effects, visual effects in particular, as a standard part of movies, as opposed to just like one-off random. You can't make a living or a career out of it. So said the lighting and I think the lighting guy, the lighting effects guy in the first movie commentary. But yeah, so that's fascinating. The Tauntauns, not the Tauntauns. The Tauntauns. Are
Yeah.
they humans?
The
Machines?
the giant furry kangaroos.
Yeah, slash ostriches.
Why would they be? How would they be human?
No, like like how did they create them? Because they like run around.
Oh, the special effects are creating those
Yeah,
puppets for some of the scenes, and then other scenes. I think probably something dressed up to look like something, whether it's a person or an animal of some sort.
gotcha.
Some of the far off scenes, you can kind of tell that they're puppets.
Sure.
Yeah, because there were elephants in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
For real.
Where were the elephants in the first movie with the Tuscans?
Yep,
The
they
bantha.
were dressed up to look like the what are they called? I
The
forget. The big
bantha?
bantha. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah,
That makes
they're
sense. I always
actually
assumed
elephants in
those were.
costume.
I thought those were puppets. Wild. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that was. Yeah. Now I have all the background, but not for the right
There you go.
movie.
Yeah.
I love snow, so I have a special place in my heart for the Hoth system. Although, like, honestly, it is there's no sign of life. Immediately followed by a surprise attack from a wampa.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like the age of the film, like, because sometimes I watch movies from the 70s and 80s, and like the pace just feels different from what
Yes.
a modern film, like
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. There's no sign of life. No one, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they're like whatever they use to measure life, a zoometer, like a biometer, whatever. Like it wasn't working. I don't, it didn't detect wampas because I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and then like it it just feels like Luke is like decidedly low on like stealth.
Mm.
Like that's just not like that's not his gift. In
Ooh,
D&D, that's
agree.
not what he's going to be high on. I don't know what he is would roll high on, but definitely not stealth.
I mean, I think he's generally pretty good on perception. I think this was like a nat one situation for perception, but like
Okay.
typically he seems
Maybe.
like yeah. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of later when he's like with Darth Vader, he's a lot more perceptive of
A
what's going
little
on
bit.
there.
Yeah, he's had more time with the Force to like increase that
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
improve that. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think so. I was watching this movie with my kids, and the Wampa came up, and my daughter was like, "Is that a Yeti?" And I was like, "No, but I could see why that looks like a Yeti."
Oh yeah.
I called it a Yeti when I was taking notes, and then I had to look up what it was actually called.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I was thinking too, like what part of what I really like about the original trilogy in particular is it does feel like there's a really big universe that
Mm,
galaxy far away is in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
yeah.
they're on this totally out in the middle of nowhere ice planet that like is just finally being caught by like one of these like search droids that's going out looking for it, and then they can Luke can go off one way and Han and Leia and Chewie and the like C3PO can go another way. It just feels really big, like it's a
Mm-hmm.
genuine like whoa, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
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 It's like it's a real galaxy.
And yet, for some reason, all the planets have only one biome. We have an entire ice planet. We have an entire desert planet. We have an entire forest moon.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
An
that's fair.
entire city planet with Coruscant. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like the things that I did love about the like battle on Hoth were that they used Rogue 2. They didn't have a Rogue One, which then we retconned in Rogue One, right? But like they actually didn't have Rogue One. They had Rogue Leader and they had Rogue 2. But they didn't ever say Rogue One. So I was really excited about that because I love the movie Rogue One. I think it's a fantastic movie. But also then like the special effects of like dental floss or thread tripping the imperial dinosaurs. I can't remember what they're called, the AT-ATs or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I just call them the imperial dinosaurs because when I was a port chaplain, we would call the machines that like loaded ships with all of the shipping crates dinosaurs, and they look the
Mm.
same. So it's imperial dinosaurs, right? That like dental floss can destroy the dinosaurs.
Yeah, that also we again watching with my kids. My son Luke, he was like, "Mom, why do they have their power thing up above the snow? That's so dumb. It's easy to destroy that way." Like,
Ooh, good point.
so
Yeah.
he had critiques about the
I
rebels'
love it.
strategic, you know, the dumbest thing.
That's fantastic. Very perceptive, Luke. A perceptive Luke.
He
Mhm.
is a very perceptive Luke.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Also, the stormtrooper snowsuits, like, I know that they're supposed to be like evil empire supremacists, but like they actually like their robes actually looked super like the KKK robes that I have seen pictures of.
ooh,
And I was
Yeah.
like,
When
I because they're snowsuits, so they have to like cover more, and so they like go down further, like the like hat
yeah.
covering things that the KKK wear. I was like, this is like scarily similar right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. We also get introduced to Treadwell in this movie, who is that cute little droid who we see on top of the Millennium Falcon. There's a story about him in that we talk about in our Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view episode.
Mm-hmm.
But he sadly dies off screen, and we find out how that happens when he gets to Cloud City. Um, but he's so cute, and when he's working on the Millennium Falcon in the beginning. Um,
But we
also,
know that he ends up in a good place because
all droids
all
go to
droids go to
heaven.
heaven.
That's true. Um, then we get to the like Han's brilliant scheme of like hiding behind the um Star Destroyer and stuff and flying off the garbage, but also like asteroids don't work that way. So that's something that always confused me about this movie.
Yeah.
Because we've sent how many space probes through the asteroid belt and they've made it through, unlike C3PO's odds of however many thousand or million to one to make it successfully through an asteroid belt.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and then
Which,
clouds.
like,
Oh, go ahead.
I get the, like, when they get to Alderaan, and it's like, there's debris everywhere, because the planet just exploded. But, yeah, asteroids don't... Asteroids don't work like that. I'm reading a book about it right now.
I mean, it is like a magic space land, so
Yep.
you know.
The Force makes asteroids work differently.
I don't know very much about asteroids, though. Now that you point out that we can send things through the asteroid belt, like, oh yeah, I suppose we can. I just always imagined that we like went up and over or something like that. It's not an asteroid sphere.
Yeah. Yep.
But, like, because the asteroids, right, and Paige and I were talking about this, I don't know, maybe when we watched the movie, but that the asteroids, if they, like, are near each other, they, like, run into each other and hit each other and break up or condense. And so to have just, like, a bunch that you have to, like, navigate through doesn't make sense with the laws of science that we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the other thing, speaking of the special effects, Cloud City, even in the theatrical version, just looks gorgeous.
It's
I
so
love the
beautiful.
pink clouds. Like the special
Mm-hmm.
effects is significantly better in the remastered version because they had computer technology, but still, just even the original, the pink is just so vibrant and pretty.
Mm.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. And I love Lando. Like,
Yeah.
he's his own brand of, like, naive trickster, making
Mm-hmm.
deals, not telling them that he made a deal with Darth Vader, but then is, like, surprised when Darth Vader's like, nope, deal changed, plans changed,
Mm-hmm.
plans changed again,
Yeah.
it's whatever I want. And he's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think the actor who plays Lando came out as non-binary, right? No.
No, he was talking about how gender isn't stable, and then people said, "Oh, he's coming out as non-binary," and then he said, "No, I am not. I am a
Oh,
man." But
okay.
so his words about kind of gender fluidity were misinterpreted as him coming out, but he was not coming out.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah.
But Billy D. Williams is his name. Great actor.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I really loved him. He's super fun.
Yeah. The other thing I thought visually about the Cloud City scenes is I really found myself envying Leia's outfit. Like,
Ooh, yeah.
I would absolutely wear a garment with like a flowing cape situation, and I would look regal everywhere I went. People would be like, "She must be a princess. Look at her with that cape."
I love capes. I think capes are wonderful. I would like a cape someday.
I love how many
Someday.
people wear capes in the Star Wars universe. Lando, Leia,
Yeah.
Darth Vader, so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I think would be terribly impractical. Like, what if you lost gravity on your ship and all of a sudden your cape is just like
Floating
floating
across
around
your
behind
face, and, like,
you,
how do you
like a
see?
jellyfish?
Yeah. It's like the costume person in The Incredibles.
Edna, no
Edna. No
capes.
capes. No capes.
Yep.
But they're so pretty. Which is
They
why,
are.
for sure, why Lando wears them. But
Oh yeah, Lando absolutely wants to be pretty.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also, the speciesism continues with the comment, he's only a Wookiee, about
Yeah.
Chewie.
Yeah.
Chewie will end up victorious in the end.
And outlive them all for sure.
Exactly.
He's already like 200 years old. He'll live another 100 or so.
Yeah.
Um,
They are
the
mere
other
pets in his life.
weird thing about this movie is always just like how much time takes place in this movie from the beginning to the end, because
Mm-hmm.
Luke seems to be on Dagobah long enough to learn a significant amount of his training, to the fact that some people say he's there for months. like even 6 months, 9 months, something like that. And so, but then that makes the timeline with Han and Leia is trying to escape Hoth and getting to Cloud City also takes several months, but that seems to be much more contracted of a journey, so the time just doesn't seem
Yeah.
to add up. So people are very.
And
So
they
that's
don't have,
always been what?
yeah, because they don't, like, they're not on Cloud City for very long.
Yeah.
It's like the first night they get there, Vader's there.
Yep.
Though
Huh.
I could imagine that there's some time between the Han Solo frozen in carbonite moment that they are like kept as prisoners before Luke come. Like that's a place I could imagine there
Oh,
being
that's true.
some
Yeah.
time lapse.
Hmm.
I don't know if months is the right answer, but like
Yeah.
Hmm.
I
Oh,
also do you know how much time's supposed to pass between the end of the previous movie and the beginning of this one?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. All right, that makes sense.
And then Return of the Jedi, I think, takes place 1 year after this, or 6 months after this one, somewhere around there.
Hmm.
Okay.
Um, the other thing is there, if you are familiar with the bad lip reading YouTube where they do bad lip reading stuff, there
Yeah.
is a fantastic bad lip reading of Yoda
Oh.
on. So I have the link right there. Y'all will have to look it up. I also put it in the show notes, but I die every time. It's called the Seagull Song. So funny. It's a whole
Oh,
musical
yeah.
number that Yoda does. So good.
Uh-huh.
That's
Um,
awesome.
I remember it.
Luke is so fucking annoying on Dagobah. Like the worst, whiniest of cis boys in the world. Like
Let
literally
me fix your
questions.
sentence for you, Pace. Luke is so fucking annoying. Period.
But I feel like it even, well, yes, 100%. But I feel like it even gets worse on Dagobah to the
Mm-hmm.
point he knows, before he knows Yoda is the Jedi Master, he's just being incredibly awful to Yoda. But
Mm-hmm.
even after he finds out, he's like questioning literally everything. It's like, you know, he's this great Jedi Master. You've said this. Obi-Wan has said this. And yet you're acting like you don't trust a single thing he's saying. It's like so obnoxious. I can't
And
with Luke in this.
speciesist.
It feels like the least surprising thing, though,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you've ever worked with a young person, especially, like, I mean, like, in like 20-year-old, right? Especially like a white man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's just like, I'm good at this. I'm so good at this. I don't need any new
Mm-hmm.
information, but I'm here, to like check off the thing that I have to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? It feels super genuine. Like maybe that
Mhm.
was one of the things that the new director like worked in.
For sure.
But like
Yeah.
the sheer entitlement and misplaced self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
For sure. 100%. Yeah.
like I have met those
Yeah.
people, right?
Yep.
um,
So many of them. Yeah. I
Um,
did love the backpack Yoda workouts, though.
yeah, that's pretty
mhm,
fun. I like it.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
the training montages are fun. Like when he's not whining,
Mm-hmm.
right?
yeah.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
backpacking in a swamp with Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to keep bringing up, well, Emily both have been from a certain point of view, but one of the stories in there is told from Obi-Wan's perspective about this book. And apparently Obi-Wan has been appearing multiple times before the time we see him at the end to basically referee Yoda and Luke's fights with each other because they kept getting angry with each other and fed up with each other. So
Mm-hmm.
Obi-Wan had to keep appearing as a Force ghost to mediate the conflict, which I just love because it feels so accurate for what's happening for the parts we
Mm-hmm.
do see on screen.
Sure. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Yoda is a little bit crotchety or
Hmm.
cantankerous or something, right?
Yeah.
With Luke.
No, for
Like,
sure.
you know,
I mean, for good reason. He knew his Luke's dad destroyed all the Jedi's, including the younglings. So I'd
right.
be kind
Mm-hmm.
of wary of this asshole kid showing up on my door too, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think Emily, you pointed this out too. R2 versus Yoda, like it's weird since the prequels came out because R2 and Yoda know each other, and we know that R2D2's memory isn't wiped, and yet they seem like they are completely meaning for each other for the first time in this movie, and
I
even
think.
fighting with each other. So it's like, what? is there an in-universe explanation for that? Is it just something that is a continuity error?
I think that Yoda, because Yoda's doing this like unknown shtick, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Luke. And it's a delightful shtick. I love
Agreed.
it. Anytime somebody like pulls the wool over Luke's eyes, I'm here for it. And my question then was though, does R2 just like go along with the shtick because it's funny to poke at Luke? And I think that tracks. Like, I think R2 would be like, ah, sure, I'll pretend like I don't know who you are, Yoda. And like I imagine some like side beeps and boops um of like the R2D2 equivalent of winking at Yoda. Um
Mm-hmm.
but it just because it plays into all of that, right? Like
That totally tracks. Agreed.
yeah, that's what I
It
think.
does also like R2. Yoda's not the only one who knows who Luke's dad is, right? R2 is along for watching Anakin Skywalker turn into Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly how like sentient R2 is meant to be. Like clearly he's got some independence and some capacity for I'm it's never quite clear to me like how much
They came
processing he's
out
doing
they
cuz
came out recently and said that he is sentient or near sentient, and we on this
okay.
podcast, as part of our All Droids Go to Heaven, that's where that
Okay.
came from. Was I think that not only is R2D2 sentient, which like again, Star Wars from a certain point of view books help like get at this, like where
Sure.
R2 kind of explains like to another droid how he developed sentience. But I
Okay.
also think that R2 is a bit of a force user. That's my own
Well,
personal thought.
and that's the piece that makes me wonder like maybe R2 knows that you have to have the capacity to deal with frustration
Mm.
to be a Jedi, or you have to have the like that he's
Mm-hmm.
holding back because he doesn't want another,
Mm.
Jedi turned Sith.
Yeah,
He
it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, that would track.
Also,
I
sorry if
like
you can
that.
hear Yoshi running in the background audience and also you recording with us.
I cannot hear Yoshi at all. I have my own
That's
background track, so
okay. Okay.
which is not one that I'm going to share on
Okay.
podcast. But yeah.
um. Oh, two, no, maybe three quick things. That I think are just very interesting. One is we finally get a lightsaber battle. Because I was complaining in the first movie about how it's set up that we're going to get this huge lightsaber battle at the end of the first movie, but instead it's a space battle, which is absolutely cool. But it just is like a weird kind of narrative twist that they do. But then in this one, we finally get a lightsaber battle, but true to Yoda's point, Luke is horrendously unprepared and barely makes it out alive. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, he also decapitates his own Vader self in Dagobah.
in on the
So,
Mhm.
cave, but that's a vision from the dark side of the force. And also that's my second point here is like just how much of a one of the things we said we talk about on this season is since we're covering Star Wars, why do we think Star Wars is appropriate to cover on a horror movie podcast? And I feel like
mm,
this is a genuinely scary movie in some parts. That scene in the cave is genuinely frightening.
Yeah.
The battle where Luke is clearly losing, and then Han Solo also loses, and then for the film to leave us off in this ambiguous thing, Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. Luke was defeated by Vader and almost killed. The rebels are hiding and lost their base. And it just is a very kind of anxiety inducing way to end the film that I feel like fits very well in like a horror trope.
Mm.
yeah, and I think we miss that a lot when we think about Star Wars because we don't think about the movies as like individual releases one at a time.
Yeah.
And especially like our generation, all of the first trilogy, all of the original trilogy were out before we were born.
Yeah.
And
And
so
then
it's like we already knew the Return of the Jedi before.
and when this hit theaters though, I mean the audience was left with this ending for 3 years before they know what happens. If Han
Mm-hmm.
Solo is even going to come back or anything like that.
Yeah.
Though, I mean, like to make a jump to a theology piece, there are ways that like our Holy Week and Easter traditions are kind of a similar sort of thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Good Friday is still really moving, even though everybody who's going to worship on Good Friday also expects to come on Easter and hear that, Jesus didn't stay dead, right? That Han Solo didn't stay frozen in carbonite, that, right, that Darth Vader doesn't get to win the day. But the risk there is, like, as you're saying, when we don't take it as a single thing, you have to, like, give space to stay in the anxiety
Yeah.
sometimes rather than jumping straight to, like, but guess what, kids, here's the next movie.
Yep,
And
Yeah. And I think
for sure.
my experience with them, and like you asked earlier, how much time is between the movies, because like we don't actually ever get a clear like, and then 3 years later, blah blah blah, right? And so for me, it's always like, and then the next day, like
Mhm.
maybe we'll skip the summer because that's what we used to do with TV shows. Like, we somehow jump from the late spring to beginning of fall. But yeah, that there's that like that time. And yeah, I mean, I know people, particularly queer people, where the Lent is their favorite season and Good Friday is one of their favorite days of the year, because they don't have to be happy and they don't have to like put on the mask of proper church smiley person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that space of like, this is a time and a space where we actually really intentionally are honoring the sadness and the anxiety and the space of not knowing and not necessarily having the hope that rebellions are built on.
Mm. I also think this is a really important story because, like, the rebellion doesn't get to be linear, like
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
a cheerful sort of like, we organized a rebellion, we destroyed a thing, now the empire's destroyed, hooray, right? Like,
Yeah.
that there are times and seasons in our lives that the power of death or destruction or loss is a lot stronger than the
Mm-hmm.
power of, like, we're gonna make it through, we'll team up with the teddy bears. um,
Yep.
and that's part of what I think makes this movie. I agree, I think it's the best with everybody who says that, um, because we need stories to tell and to consume that, like, let us have space for, like, whew, that did not go the way we thought it was going to.
Yeah.
Who knows what's next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that it has been especially the case since the pandemic started, of like there has just been this real reckoning that it has happened to for some people on an individual basis, but we have not had culturally, of like, this is not who we want ourselves to be, this is not how we want to be. Like, we are in the middle of the second greatest COVID surge since the pandemic started, and like my whole immediate family has had COVID in the last week and gave it to each other and had never had COVID up until that. Like, one person had COVID previously. Um, and I think we just like, we have not been creating and holding that space for acknowledging the ways that we have mishandled the pandemic and the ways that it has caused so much more harm that we're not going to recover from. That like literally people are dead who didn't have to be dead, kind of harm. Um, yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Because yeah, happy. We call it fun times at the island in our house, and it is decidedly not fun times.
Yeah.
Um,
And thank you, Beth, for helping us transition into our deep dive because you did that so flawlessly. And we're like, yeah, see,
it's true.
amazing.
It's true.
Um,
Who knew a cis person could transition?
I mean, I do have my moments, not many.
love it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to talk about, because this is the first time it comes up significantly in the Star Wars universe, chronologically from how they are released, not like the episode order, but
Mm-hmm.
this is the first time we really get descriptions of a light side versus a dark side of the Force. In the first movie is just the Force as this kind of all encompassing thing. This one is divided clearly into a binary between light and dark side. Vader's on the dark side, Luke's on the light side, Yoda's on the light side, and there's a danger of transgressing into the dark side if you are a light side user. And so we talk about this a lot in all of the episodes, but it is important to just name that A, first of all, is a false binary, but also that is very racist and colorist terminology that this film perpetuates by using those terms, associating light with goodness and dark with badness or evil.
Which, shout out to God's Holy Darkness. I will forever shout out that book.
Such a great book.
It's
By,
so good.
yeah, written by Cherie Green and Becca Selnick and illustrated by Nikki Faison. It's fantastic. I love that book. But yeah, it's that the church does that a lot too, right? This is part of what we keep coming back to in the movies is like, are the Jedi clergy or police? And like, again, false binary. Um, but the ways that like religion, particularly Christianity, talks about light and good and dark and bad. And there are movements within Christianity to like shift how we're using that language, because it's a lot of times in the Bible it's more about like what is revealed or visible or perceivable and what is hidden, which you can use other words to say that. But I do think like the like having the force and the balance of the force, and then having light and dark, and the perception that balance to the force means the light side has the greater representation, and that's like inherently not balance.
Yeah, and I don't know, like it feels like in a lot of ways in the original, or not the original, in the second trilogy, episodes 1 through 3, like very often the Sith are like more powerful than individual Jedi, you know, and so there's like this question of like, is balance that like the power of the dark side is like concentrated, you know, in these two or something.
As opposed to
But
being dispersed among the many Jedi.
yeah, I'm not sure. But they are weird, like where they fit in society. They're not quite police or soldiers, though they certainly like take that role sometimes. They're not quite clergy, but they do that also.
Yeah.
Diplomats, right? They're
Yep.
just
It's a weird
warrior
place that
monks or
like
something.
as a clergy I'm like, I don't want them to be clergy. And also like the ways that they are clergy are like fairly accurate at calling out the like problematic stuff around clericalism and clergy in an institution that protects the institution and the like perceived leaders of the institution, which are the clergy and the Jedi. Yeah, which is less of a thing in this movie, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but definitely a huge thing in the prequels, which we'll be getting to next month. But
yeah,
also with the Force, just Yoda. Um, one of the, Emily and I just find that we love so many of the characters in this that we're kind of tracking some of the characters throughout all their appearances in the films and TV shows and things. And Yoda is one of those that's just so fascinating because, as Claudia Gray says in the prequel trilogy, Yoda does not say a single wise thing. But in this movie, like he is so wise to the point that that religions have been like founded around him in real life, be like people and stuff like that, just so inspired by his quotes and stuff like that. And kind of the change of Yoda's characterization throughout the films. And so interesting here is that when Yoda says war does not make one great, Yoda has learned from the Clone Wars. So this is after the Clone Wars, after he was willingly saying Jedi should participate in that, and he's like, nope, that was a mistake. He's learned. Of course, that's the
Mm,
retcon, but like within the, it just makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and he even like there so much of what tripped up Anakin and what trips up Jedi is this, like, you have to be detached from your emotions and you cannot feel your feelings. And then when Luke is like, I'm not afraid, Yoda's like, you will be. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that piece that, like, we don't unpack enough and doesn't get, like, really explored as much as I would love for it to, but like that piece of like, no, you will have these emotions that you might not like, that you might not want to have, but you will have them because they are
Mm-hmm.
part of being human, because they are part of being sentient.
Yeah. I mean, and to the point that Yoda doesn't scold Luke for having these strong attachments for Leia and Han and wanting to save them. He is saying, if he's saying, use that attachment to them to remember what they are fighting for and what their values are so that we can ultimately defeat the Emperor. But he's not saying don't have these relationships or don't have these
Yeah,
feelings. Whereas in the prequel trilogy, there's a lot of Jedi aren't
very
supposed to have
much. Yeah,
any attachment. They're not supposed to have any close relationships with people, even on friendship levels and stuff.
yeah.
So the Yoda's learned. I'm so proud.
It's true. It's true.
And then the last thing I have related to the Force, and then I know you have a lot of theological stuff too, Emily, but related to the Force itself is the dualism that is presented here, another false binary. But this is also we see this in all movies that talks about the Force, but this somehow the fleshiness or the earthly world is an illusion. It's really the spiritual world, the spiritual power of the Force, and that's similar or perhaps directly ripped off of some forms of Hindu and Buddhist beliefs that there's a division of corporeal forms that is an illusion and that actually all beings are connected and it's only the flesh that we think separates us is just an illusion. But also very much a part of Christianity because of Hellenistic culture influence and dualism there. So we have Christianity has a version of dualism which is not actually biblical, uh, and yet everybody thinks of like this strict separation between heaven and hell, and the body and the spiritual and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I
the
mean,
way we,
C.S. Lewis says, right? Like, I am a soul that has a body.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is a whole, yeah, and Paul, right? Like the way that
Mm-hmm.
we translate Paul to be like just speaking down to flesh, and like the way that that's translated and then interpreted in 2024 as opposed to 24.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also think with the Force there's the question, and it comes, I think, out of the mind body spiritual flesh dualism, but the question of if it's controllable. And that comes up
Mm.
in this episode of like, you need to learn to control the Force. And I hadn't really noticed it before, but then when I was thinking about it, I was like, that's not actually like accurate to the way that the Force works and the way that we
Mm.
understand the Force. Like, people, however you define people, sentient beings, whatever, Force users, don't control the Force. And we get this, like, we'll come back to it, I'm sure, in the sequel trilogy, because Rey very much is like connecting into the Force more so than controlling the Force as she learns about the Force. And so that sense of like patriarchy of like, you have to control this thing, and then the other models of relationship with the Force are, no, you let the Force flow through you and be present in and around you, and you connect to it, but you don't control it. And that makes it a huge difference in just like how we think about it,
Yeah.
um, but also I think in how it's used.
One of these days, you're going to have to, well, you don't have to, of course, but I would love for you to read the High Republic series of novels, of which Claudia Gray, former guest on the show, has written a few of them. But there's some direct challenges from another Force worshipping religion to the Jedi's notion of control and mastery over the Force that comes up in some of the books. And it's really
Mm.
interesting that the Force should be free of control to do as it wills, and we should just follow the Force. And they are at odds with the Jedi who feel that you should have mastery over the Force and utilize it.
Which like
Well,
makes
and
sense. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking in the next movie, I realize that's not this episode, but like the Emperor is like, yeah, feel your anger, let it flow through you, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this like, um, I don't know if it's just like some weird 80s masculinity, like around controlling your emotions versus like letting them flow through you. Um,
Yeah. Well, and we don't think about anger as an emotion though. Like that's part of the toxic masculinity stuff is like emotions are bad and feelings are bad, but anger, just let it run rampant. Like let it do whatever it wants.
mhm.
And the reality that like anger is an emotion. It's a feeling.
Mhm.
Right.
But yeah, the like yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, are y'all excited about Inside Out 2, the sequel? Speaking of anger,
So much,
Yes.
I am so excited.
so much.
And I love that the new emotion introduced is anxiety. Like, how perfect. Anxious
Right.
face.
Yeah.
I'm super excited.
Anxiety.
Can I tell you, I have a 9-year-old, right? And I'm sitting here, I'm like, great, this is going to be my next parenting tool. We're going to go watch this movie.
Yep.
Yep.
And then we'll be like, oh, here, meet anxiety and I don't know, hormonal body odor and whatever the other emotions are. And
Yep.
like,
I love it.
Yeah. I am excited for Inside Out too. It's yeah. I remember watching the first one and I was in a like place where I was like, this is gonna be both wonderful and really the worst thing ever for me in this particular moment. And I was right.
I cried. We had just moved. I
Right.
cried. I was like,
Right. Oh, I cried from beginning to end in that movie the
Yeah.
first time I saw it.
It's so good though. Like
Agreed.
it's just so good. Yeah. One of the other things that comes up I think for me in Force is also like the way that we talk about destiny, and I think we talk about Force and destiny in similar ways. I think we in the non-Star Wars universe talk about destiny in similar ways that Force is talked about in universe a lot of the times, of like it is this thing that exists, and like none of us are Calvinist, so like predestination is not like our jam or whatever, but
It was Luther's, though. My famous thing I like to correct that
I
Luther
know.
himself was a double predestinationist. People don't realize.
Yeah, but there are a few things that Luther said and believed that we don't today.
Agreed. Agreed.
That is one of them. But like Darth Vader in in when he's like fighting Luke and stuff, he's like, "Luke, it is your destiny," and also says like, "You are beaten. It is useless to resist." And so there's just this like sense of like the inevitable, that Darth Vader has this sense of the inevitable
Yeah.
in a way that Luke does not, right? Because
And
Luke does resist and does not just give in, and like Luke doesn't just follow the like, this is your destiny, well okay then. Like he resists that and creates a different destiny, or perhaps if Luther or Calvin were around would say like he was already destined to do the other thing. But
I do think the language here is really interesting, right? The force, right? A force is something that acts on something else, right? If we're going to get sciencey about it. Um, but the force is largely a tool that people use, right? Like at least in the films, maybe in some of the other things, this isn't true, but in the films, the force is not like the destiny maker or the thing that is like pulling strings behind the scenes.
mm-hmm.
It's the tool that gets used to pick up spaceships out of the swamp or to make a lightsaber fly to you so you don't get eaten by a wampa or whatever you use the force for, right? But it's a
Mm-hmm.
tool that can be used in like really great ways or really terrible ways or like neutral ways, or things that are somewhere in between.
and
Mm-hmm.
two things came to mind as you were saying that too. One though is that there, while it's not in the films, and I absolutely agree with you about it not really being in the films, George Lucas has said many times, and again, George Lucas is, anything he says about Star Wars always take with a massive grain of salt. But he says in his mind, the Force makes the universe arc towards good. And so that way, Han Solo might not be using the Force as a tool, but the Force is still making sure that the Millennium Falcon will outrun the Death Star. and stuff like that. So the Force is pushing all the characters towards and the universe towards good. So
So
evil
it's
can never
like the
ultimately
Holy
triumph.
Spirit.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but also that gets into like that linearness of history and progressive theology, which not progressive, but that the idea though that there's like this teleology, this end goal that the
Mm-hmm.
universe is being pulled towards, which we do say in the Christological moment there's a piece of that, but I think many Lutherans or progressive Christians at least would take a step back and say history doesn't actually arc towards good in a way that we feel or experience. Um, and so we have inbreaking, I hate that phrase, but inbreaking of those future moments of good ultimately triumphing. But in our life, empire very much sometimes takes the day and stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
also the fact that this film ends on such a sad note, an empire winning note, I think plays to that. And then the other thing I was thinking as you were talking, especially Emily, about Destiny is just how much Vader was trained during the Clone Wars as when he was Anakin, and very much has that cop soldier mentality. And I've been on a true crime binge kick, so I've been watching a lot of true crime, and the amount of videos of cops saying to to people who are not even criminals, who they are just have as their suspect of the day, right, regardless of innocence, they will use terms like it is useless to resist. You need to just fess up to the crime. We know you did it, and stuff like that, regardless of what the truth of the matter actually is. And so, how similar Vader terminology and phrasing he is using to.
Mm.
Yeah. And that also like fits within the militarization of the police today. That
Yeah.
like so much of the ways that policing has escalated violence are connected to military equipment being given sometimes and sometimes bought by police forces. Um, that like it encourages them to interpret and understand their role as military, which increases the violence that happens when um, when we as like non-police are in the world and trying to protest that violence. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if all the tools at your disposal are military grade, right? Like, then that's your range of options, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you have different tools, you have different options, but that's not largely the way we haven't chosen to equip police officers with tools that are not military grade.
Yeah. We had I was at a meeting in the beginning of January for our conference gathering, and they were talking about the rollout of 988, which is the mental health emergency
Mm.
line. And um, part of it, like, some of the questions were like, can you guarantee that police are not going to respond? And they can't, right? Like, there are certain ways that they can like adjust or like know if police are going to respond, um, but they ultimately can't. And so that like even as we are trying to like have mental health responders, first responders, it is not necessarily doing what it needs to do to stop the policing and the violence of policing, even as it like potentially and hopefully decreases the violence of policing. um, the other piece that I think that I wanted to talk about, particularly because I have really appreciated your insights in this, Beth, and like the articles that you have written about disability, um, is like this is the first time in the Star Wars universe, according to release order, right, that we really get a sense of disability exists and assistive devices and things exist. And then, like, what does that mean? How does that work? All of that stuff. And so, like, again, Pace and I keep coming back to our Star Wars Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view books. But one of the very last stories is the story. I should actually know what it's called and who it's by because that matters. The story Right Hand Man by Lydia Kang.
Mm.
And I wrote it down in the notes in the doc. So go me for writing it down and then forgetting that I wrote it down. But that sense of like in the story, so this is the part where, right, like at the end of the movie, Darth Vader cuts off Luke's hand, and so then we see the med droid, who is the same med droid that like helped him recover from the Bacta tank, and then is here. And there's this like, we don't get a lot of it in the movie. There's like the poking of the fingers to make sure that they like have the same kind of reactions and stuff. But then in the story, there's this like really beautiful thing where the droid is like trying to understand what is going on with Luke. And part of it is like the emotional stuff going on with like Luke and Leia and Han and the complexity of that like triangle. Um but also the like emotions that Luke is feeling, because this is a significant shift in Luke's own self-understanding, right? Like that Luke has always understood himself to be someone with two hands. And now he's not, but also he is. And like I don't know, there's the like magical trope. There's the ableist trope, right? Of you get disabled and then something happens that like compensates completely for your disability. But also there's the like it's an assistive device. And how do we I don't know. That's my like word vomiting of this.
Yeah. So I was born with one hand. My left arm stops just above where my it's above elbow. Right. So I have like the first third of an arm. And so I was thinking about this because you like sort of primed me, right? Like I want to talk about it. And so when I was little, like starting at age 2, I had been fitted for a prosthesis, a prosthetic arm, a couple of times. Like, you know, like you have growth spurts, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at 2 and 4 and 7 and whatever else. And it's not a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And the prosthetics that are available to like 4-year-olds, because they know you're going to outgrow them, are mostly like bulky and heavy and uncomfortable. Um, so I didn't experience them as like particularly assistive.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing I've been trying to think about, like I have a congenital amputation. Luke was a grown up, a
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Yeah.
canonically a 22-year-old. You know, and so I don't know because I haven't. Most of the folks that I've talked with around like amputation in particular are also congenital amputees. Um, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure how it would be different for someone who lost an arm or a leg in like an accident or
Mm-hmm.
a kind of a like veteran in a war situation or something. But I do remember when I was like 10 and I basically gave up on wearing a prosthetic arm.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, but if you keep it up, then you could have this really cool, like electric arm that, you know, was like, had like, I don't know, somehow diodes in it that like when I moved the muscles in my upper left arm, it would have then moved the hand of this like prosthetic arm. Um, and I just didn't feel like I needed that, like that was going to add something to my self or my wholeness. Um, and in the Star Wars movie, it's such a small piece. It's just like a almost like a. I mean, it's a big deal that Darth Vader cuts his arm off and then he falls, right? But it's, you know, we next see the conclusion of this hand being reassembled
Mm-hmm.
after they catch him in the Millennium Falcon. Like just such a matter of course, like, well, we have the technology, we help, you know,
Yeah.
get him a new hand. um I mean, it is an assistive device, and I think that that's really cool, like that we do get the moment of the scene where they're like poking and prodding at the wires to see how this moves, because that feels like a way of recognizing, I guess, like the realness and the value of assistive devices as something that, like, you know, sometimes it needs adjustment or sometimes
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, so it's just been an interesting thing to reflect on because, like I said, for the end of this movie, it's just like almost just for granted, right? It's just not even comment worthy. Like, of course he's having this prosthetic arm put on, and like,
Yeah.
look, it moves, cool. um
Yep.
Scene.
Yeah, and then it
Mhm.
doesn't like there are a couple times where it kind of comes back up, but for the
Mhm.
most part like we don't notice it's because it is made to blend so precisely with his original hand. Like it is not intended to be noticed in the subsequent movies,
I
for the most part.
think I think that's I I think remember that differently in that in subsequent movies, in Return of the Jedi, he immediately gets shot on that hand and exposes a wire, so he wears a black glove for the rest of the movie. And then he no longer has the human looking skin over top of the hand in the sequel trilogy, but it's just a exposed robotic hand.
I was gonna say, I think the sequel trilogy. I agree with you about the sequel trilogy that I think there's more of a like acknowledgement of that, and I would like to think that that is because like they have learned the things about like don't just like make people disabled and then hide it and erase it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I did not remember the Return of the Jedi because it's been a while, but I there's also a YouTuber that friend of the podcast Susanna Porter likes, um, who's Nerd Forge, and there was an accident and she cut off her pinky, like
Mm.
just I think just below the first knuckle, and she made herself a new one, and she like YouTubed making herself a new one because that's like the stuff that she does. Like she just makes stuff.
Cool.
Um, but so she like did a whole YouTube of like how I made I cut off my pinky, so I made myself a new one, and it's fascinating to see like how she does it, and I think especially, and we can link to the video for it, but I think especially because it looks so easy for Luke, and then for her like just a pinky, which is a finger that we don't really think about a lot, and we
Mhm.
don't think we need a lot, and yet like her realization of how much she uses it, and like how do I get how do I make a pinky that does what I need it to do, and then what are the limitations of the technology that's available for that. It's just fascinating. But yeah, that's it. Yeah. And of course the prequel trilogies have a lot more that digs into disability and assistive devices and stuff, particularly when Anakin gets sliced
Mm-hmm.
and diced.
And also,
Right.
that's something we could point out here too, is that for the first time in this movie, we see Vader just a brief shot of him without his body armor, which is an assistive device and allows him to, and also is basically keeps him alive. Without that, or without being inside of his little egg we see in this movie, he would not be able to live. So I think
mhm.
it's also interesting that this movie features that as well.
Yeah.
Pointed that out.
I do think one thing I do appreciate, right? I notice in movies when people have disabilities, especially when they have like limb differences, right?
Hmm.
Um, and in like sci-fi sort of writ large, those people are almost always villains,
Mm.
right? Like there's a bunch of Marvel villains
Hmm.
where like, oh no, this man lost his arm and now he's a Spider-Man villain for like no particular reason
Yeah.
other than that his
But
hand got cut off,
yeah.
right?
Become
Same thing. I don't
disabled,
remember.
become a villain.
Right.
Right.
I don't remember the name of the guy in Black Panther, right? But the
Hmm.
you know, played by Andy
The
Serkis, whoever
claw
that
guy.
character
The
was.
claw guy.
Yeah, the claw.
Claw.
Yeah. Again with a name, right? Like,
Hmm.
but I think that's important in a way, like for um me at least to be like, oh, I am perhaps not a Jedi Knight or a man, but like that's a connection that I feel like
Hmm.
um I had with like Luke Skywalker also only has one hand, sort of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I mean, that happens in queer community too, right? Like that so many villains are queer coded. Um,
Yeah.
Mm.
and I I wish I knew where the meme was, but like there was a meme talking about pirates and the like how amazing pirates are because they are so good with disability. Like you lose
Mm-hmm.
an eye, wear a patch, you're fine. You lose a leg, like here's a peg. You lose your hand, here's a hook. And like that you just keep going. And like
Yeah.
there's I mean obviously like Hook from Peter Pan is a villain. But in so much of pirating lore and like pop culture, and especially now as we're getting like a lot more like One Piece and other shows that are focusing on pirates not from a like pirates are the bad guys kind of perspective, the like queerness of pirating and the disabilities in
Mhm.
pirating are like fascinating to me to
Like
like
our
watch those
flag,
converge in really fruitful ways.
like our flag
Yeah.
means death is a great example of that too, I think.
Yeah, I have
Um,
not seen that one yet, but that
uh,
is on my list to
and
watch.
to your point too, Beth, about the way um people with limb differences are often coded as villains or outright villains. In the first movie, Obi-Wan says like so judgmentally, Vader is more machine than man now, as like this very like scathing
Mm-hmm.
judgment of who Vader is as a person. When the machines are part of his devices keeping him alive and things like that, and are life giving advice devices for him.
Hmm.
Of course, he
Yeah,
uses that to terrorize the universe, but
yeah. That's the Cinder series is
Yeah.
I
They're so
love that.
good.
I love that series. Um and that's like the main character is a cyborg
Hmm.
and is like only alive because of like artificial quote unquote artificial, right, like the metal and technology and stuff that like recovered her body because spoilers she was like burned, and so just like it wasn't functional, and so that like recovered her body so that she could live. And this like person is trying to find her because she's the lost princess of the moon. um and they're trying to find her, and so they do this like search thing, but in doing that search thing for cyborgs they actually create a situation where there's like increasing prejudice against cyborgs
Hmm.
that's really harmful, and it's a whole thing, and it becomes a whole series, and it's like the the princesses, like retellings of the princesses in a like futuristic sci-fi world, fantasy world.
Yeah, super fun.
Yeah, I really like them a lot. Heard them a few years ago, but yeah, another great kind of thinking about disability and assistive devices in ways that are not just like villainizing, but also get at the ways that that prejudice can lead towards villainization. And yeah.
we are running long again, which I think we're going to just have to accept for all of our Star Wars episodes. But I also want to be conscientious of our guests' time.
How was my
So,
last deep dive thing?
well, I wasn't saying it like disparaging about that. I was just going to say for like the Force lore, just a few quick things if we're
Mm,
ready to move on there. But if you have more deep dive, please go for it. Okay.
no. And we talked some about Force stuff too. So
Yeah.
like incorporate the stuff we'd already talked about.
Yeah, so I mean,
Plus,
we've already talked about a lot of it. Just the two things that I think haven't been named yet are some places can be strong in dark side energy, like the cave. So some
mm-hmm,
places apparently radiate or have some sort of concentration of dark side energy or light side energy, as we'll find out. And then Force can move things telepathically, which we didn't actually really see in the first film. This is the first time we see it in this movie. So kind of a
mm-hmm.
new superpower that comes with being a Jedi, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. And lots of
And
Yoda isms.
yeah,
Do or do not. There is no try.
which
Not
is not
spoken.
actually helpful advice, I think. It's
Mhm.
okay to try
Agreed.
things out.
Agreed. Yeah, that's like actually super harmful.
Mhm.
Super harmful. Um, yeah.
So, I guess we can get to rating the movie then. Out of 10 kyber crystals, which are the crystals that power a lightsaber, because Emily and I are super nerdy and know these things, I guess. Um, how would you rate this film? Do you have a favorite kill? Because we're a horror podcast, we typically cover like what our favorite kill is, but there are, but
There
there aren't that many. There
are
are a
there
few though.
kills.
There are a lot of like random rebel and stormtrooper dies on the Hoth battle, but not much
Mm.
beyond that. We don't actually know any of their names.
Yeah. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Mm.
Really think it's an excellent movie. And I think my favorite kill is, if we can count it,
Mm-hmm. We can.
when Luke uses his little like repeller tool to get up on the bottom of the AT-AT and like puts a little explosive thing in it, and then it just like
I
floops.
love that. That's a great one. You need me to go next, Emily, so you can be last, or you go?
I can go.
Okay.
I think I would rate this. No, you go first.
Okay.
I can't decide. I'm stuck between two, so I have to think on it.
I will also rate this a 9 out of 10. It is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, especially of the original trilogy, hands down the best, I think. But um, and my favorite kill, I think, is actually my least favorite kill, but I feel like it deserves mentioning, is the poor Tauntaun who gets murdered just so Luke can stay warm in its guts for a while. Tauntaun
For
deserved
real.
better.
There's a whole the Star Wars from a certain point of view. Gosh, we really should be making money off of this.
Right.
Um, which, speaking of, we have a book list on bookshop.org, so you should definitely check out our book list. And if you order stuff from it, I think we technically get like a penny or something. Um, yeah. So we have like our any books we mentioned this season, but we also have like Pace and I each have our own like recommended books.
Any book mentioned in any episode from the beginning of the podcast, in fact.
Oh, nice. Um, yeah. So there's a story about the Tauntaun from the Tauntaun's perspective, um, which is how I know that humans are just like so uncivilized and don't understand smell and can't understand smells. Um, okay, y'all are putting me at like slightly higher. I'm gonna go for 8.5. I was between 8 and 8.5. I'm gonna go for 8.5 kyber crystals, um, because I did really like it, and I liked the space for conversations, and also it still has whiny Luke as the main like quote unquote main one. Um, but I do love Yoda and R2 and like special characters. And my favorite kill would be the dental floss that destroys the AT-ATs.
Love it.
Because that's just spectacular. It's just kind of like,
Any jump scares, Emily?
no jump scares. This
I'd
is
be
the first
surprised if you
season that
did.
we've had like more than one jump scare for me for a show because Alien, I had two big jump scares.
Mhm.
So we're finally getting into like the horror. I don't watch horror movies at night, and um, this is part of the like slow introduction. So I hadn't had like a bunch of jump scares, and I was like, maybe I'm like know all the tropes now, and so I'm not gonna jump. And then I jump scared twice in Alien. Never mind.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, indeed. So Beth, where can
Mhm.
our fests find you?
Mm.
Where
Yeah,
can our guests find you? Do you have any
Where can
upcoming
our listeners find
project?
you?
There.
Because
Oh
you are
gosh.
indeed our guest.
I am found.
Words
There
are
you
hard. I
are.
get it.
Find yourself. Where's Beth? Not where's Waldo.
Um, no, it's very easy to find me if like my husband and I get separated, like in a shopping mall or something. He's like, "Have you seen a lady with one arm?" And people are like, "Oh yeah, she went that way." Um,
Yeah, that
um,
tracks.
so where to find me? Yeah, I'm trying to. I don't have like upcoming publication sorts of things coming. The articles that Emily you mentioned are on Living Lutheran or Working Preacher. Is where I've got published stuff.
And we can link
Um,
those in the show notes too, so y'all
Yeah.
can find them easy.
Yeah.
yeah. And I write a weekly devotion for the church. So if you want to follow church devotions at resurrectionlutheran.org/devotions, you can see what I'm thinking on any given week. Um,
Awesome. Well, I will say our next movie, which happens to be a scary one, and then Emily will share what our next non-scary movie. Well, still scary,
We're
but
just
not
doing
next.
each franchise. You do the
Yes,
Aliens franchise, I do the Star Wars franchise.
perfect. Yes. So next week we are going to look at the movie Aliens, which came out in 1986 and was
My birth year.
a year after I was born.
Were you going to say something else about it? Sorry, I
Mm-mm.
interrupted. Okay. And then in 2 weeks, our next Star Wars movie is Star Wars Return of the Jedi, which came out in 1983.
Woot woot.
Do, 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 do. Also, sometime this month, hopefully, our final book episode will book season episode will come out on Star Wars: The Return of the Jedi, from a certain point of view, which I'm still finishing, but having fun with.
I need to finish it too. I made it like a third of the way through, and then because we still at that point hadn't recorded our Empire Strikes Back one, I was like, I'm gonna hold off, and then I just never got back to it.
Yeah.
But I will.
I'm in the middle of it, except for the pause to read,
Pluto.
how I killed Pluto and why I had it coming. Poor Pluto.
Yep. Well, I guess that's it for our show then. Our theme music was by Matt May. We release seasonally on Thursdays. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you catch your podcasts. Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, BlueTube episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horrornerds@church. It's only $5 to sign up, so much cheaper than however much money Han Solo, Frozen, and Carbonite is worth.
Lots,
Right.
apparently.
Follow us on social media, all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Horror Nerds at Church, Twitter, and Blue Sky, HNACPOD, YouTube, I think HNACPOD, for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, I'm standing here in pieces, and you're having delusions of grandeur.
Yes! I'm so glad that came up because you didn't mention it before, and I was like,